And now it is time for Creepy Stories with Lettuce McGrims, the part of the show where Lettuce McGrims reads a true creepy story or a creepypasta. This is the continuation of I'm a search and rescue officer for the U.S. Forest Service. I have some stories to tell. Submitted by Searchandrescuewoods. As far as advice on becoming an SAR officer goes, I think the best advice I can give is to contact your local Forest Service office and see if they offer training courses or what the qualifications are. I've been doing this for years, and I started out as a volunteer helping on SAR operations. It's a great job despite the occasional tragic situations, and I wouldn't want to do anything else. Alright, let's move on to the stories. I haven't seen a lot of animal bites in my time as an SAR officer, mostly because there aren't many animals that come around the area. While there are bears in the area, they tend to stay pretty far away from people, and sightings are highly unusual. Most of the animals you'll see are small ones, like coyotes, raccoons, or skunks. What we do see frequently, though, are moose. And let me tell you, moose are nasty fuckers. They'll chase you for anything, for any reason, and God help you if you get in between a female and its baby. One of the more amusing calls was a guy who'd gotten chased down by an absolutely massive male deer and was stuck up a tree. Took us almost an hour to get him down, and when he finally got on solid ground again, he looks at me and says, "God damn, them nasty fuckers is big up close." I guess it's not really a scary story, but we still laugh about that one. The first happened on a case that I went out on right after I got out of training, and was still pretty new to everything. Before I took this job, I was a volunteer, so I had a basic idea of what to expect. But on those calls, we're mostly dealing with finding lost people after vets have found signs of them. As an SAR officer, you go out on all kinds of cases, from animal bites to heart attacks. This case got called in early in the morning from a young couple who were up on the trails that goes by the lake. The husband was completely hysterical, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on. We could hear the woman screaming in the background, and he was begging us to come up there right away. When we got there, we saw him holding his wife, and she's got something in her arms. She's screaming these awful, almost animal-like screams, and he's sobbing. He sees us, and he screams at us to help them to please get an ambulance up there. Now, obviously, we can't just drive an ambulance up the walking path, so we ask him if his wife needs help, or if she can walk on her own. He's still hysterical, and he manages to tell us that it's not his wife that needs help. I go over while one of the vets tries to calm him down, and I ask the wife what's going on. She's rocking, holding something, and just shrieking over and over. I crouch down and see that whatever she's holding, it's covering her with blood. That's when I notice the sling on her front, and my heart sinks. I ask her to tell me what's going on, and I sort of pry her arms gently open so I can see what she's holding. It's her baby. Obviously dead. His head is caved in on one side, and he's covered in scratches. Now, I've seen dead bodies before, but something about this whole situation hits me hard. I have to take a second to compose myself, and I get up and go over to one of the other vets who's standing by. I tell him that it's a dead kid, and he sort of pats my shoulder and tells me he'll deal with it. It took us over an hour to get this woman to let us see her kid. Every time we try to take him from her, she flips out and tells us we can't have him, that he'll be okay if we just leave her alone with him and let her help him. But eventually, one of the vets manages to calm her down, and she gives us the body.
Won't be able to pick this.
We took it back to the med area, but when the EMT showed up, they told us that there was never any hope of saving the kid. He'd probably died instantly from the trauma to his head. I was good buddies with one of the nurses who met them at the hospital, and she told me later what had happened. Turns out the couple had been walking with the baby in a sling, and they stopped because the kid was fussing. The dad takes the kid and is holding him, looking out over this little gully by the path. The mom comes up to stand next to him, but she ends up stepping on a loose patch of soil, and she trips. She falls into the dad, who drops the kid, who ends up falling about 20 feet down this little gully into the rocks at the bottom. The dad climbed down and recovered the kid. But he'd fallen right on his head and was dead by the time he got there. The baby was only about 15 months old. It was a total freak accident, a series of events that coalesced into the worst possible outcome. Probably one of the more awful calls I have been on. I honestly don't know how I'd forgotten this story, but it is by far the scariest thing that's happened to me. I guess maybe I've tried so long to forget about it that it just didn't come to mind right away. As someone who spends literally all of their time in the woods, you don't ever want to let yourself get scared of being alone or out in the middle of nowhere. It's why when you have experiences like this, you tend to just forget about them and move on. This is, to date, the only thing that's ever made me really seriously consider if this job is the right one for me. I don't really like talking about it much, but I'll do the best I can to remember it all. As I recall, this took place right at the end of spring. It was a typical lost child call. A 4-year-old girl had wandered away from her family's campsite and had been missing for about 2 hours. Her parents were completely despondent and told us what most parents do. My kid would never run away. She's so good about staying close. She's never done anything like this before. We assure the parents that we'll do everything we can to find her, and we spread out in a standard search formation. I was partnered with one of my good buddies, and we were sort of casually holding conversation while we hiked. I know it sounds callous, but you do sort of become desensitized when you've done this long enough. It becomes the norm, and I think to a certain extent you have to learn to desensitize yourself in order to work this job. We search for a good 2 hours, getting well beyond where we think she'd be, and we come out of a small valley when something makes us stop in unison. We freeze and look at each other. And there's almost a sensation like a plane depressurizing. My ears pop and I have this odd sensation of having dropped about 10 feet. I start to ask my buddy if he felt that, but before I can, we hear the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. It's like a freight train passing directly by us, and it's coming from every direction at once, including above and below us. He screams something to me, but I can't hear him over this deafening roar. Understandably freaked out, we look all around us trying to find the source of the sound, but neither of us sees anything. Of course, my first thought is a landslide, but we're not near any cliffs, and even if we were, it would have hit us by now. The sound goes on, and we're trying to yell to each other, but even standing close together, we can't hear anything but this sound. Then as suddenly as it starts, it stops, like someone threw a switch and cut it off. We stand there for a second. Perfectly still. And slowly, the normal sounds of the woods come back. He asked me what the fuck just happened, and I kind of shrug, and we stand there looking at each other for a minute. I get on the radio and ask if anyone else has just heard the end of the fucking world, but no one else hears it, even though we're all within shouting distance of each other. My buddy and I just sort of shrug it off and keep going. About an hour later, we all catch up on the radios, and no one's found the little girl. Most of the time we won't search when it's dark, but because we don't have any kind of lead on her, a few of us decide to keep going, including me and my buddy. We keep close together, and we're calling out her name every couple of minutes. At this point, I'm hoping beyond hope that we find her because, while I may not like kids, the idea of them being out all alone in the dark is awful. The woods can be intimidating to kids in the daylight. At night, well, whole different beast. But we're not seeing any signs of her, or getting any responses. And around midnight, we decide to turn around and head back to the rendezvous point. We're about halfway back when my buddy stops and shines his light to the right of us into a really thick deadfall or group of dead trees. I ask him if he's heard a response, but he just tells me to be quiet a second and listen. I do, and in the distance I can hear what sounds like a kid crying. We both call the girl's name and listen for any kind of response, but it's just this really faint crying. We head in the direction of this deadfall and go around it, calling her name over and over. As we get closer to the crying, I start getting this weird feeling in my gut, and I tell my buddy that something isn't right. He tells me he feels the same way, but we can't figure out what it is. We stop where we are and call the girl's name again, and at the same time we both figure it out. The crying is on a loop. It's the same little chin sob, then wail, then quiet hiccup. Repeated. Over and over. It's exactly the same every time. And without saying another word, we both take off running. It's the only time I've ever lost my composure like that, but something about it was so incredibly wrong, and neither of us wanted to stay out there anymore. When we got back to the rendezvous, we asked if anyone else had heard anything strange, but no one else knew what we were talking about.
Bingo.
I know it sounds sort of anticlimactic, but that call fucked me up for a long time. As for the little girl, we never found a trace of her. We keep an eye out for her, and all the other people we've never found, but frankly, I doubt we'll ever find anything. We interrupt this program from a message from your handy-dandy Fallout information package. The terminal that Sturgis is trying to hack has lines of text scrolling upwards on it when not in use by the player. The text is mainly comprised of general Robco terminal error messages, but some snippets include cryptic messages such as, "Please save yourselves," "Error, it's the end 6," and "Robco Industries in apocalyptic situations. Please reboot system error. There's no one left, is there? Oh God." The messages were likely left by Megan Hayes as the bombs begun to fall. If the sole survivor already has a fusion core in their inventory when they speak to Sturgis, they can use it in the power armor and save the one found in the basement. Sturgis has alternative dialogue if the player is already wearing power armor accepting the quest. He will also remark differently depending on the presence or absence of a power core. If there is no power core, he will still recommend retrieving one from the basement. There is also additional dialogue with Preston Gavery if the sole survivor is already carrying a minigun. It is possible to skip this quest altogether and head towards Diamond City straight away. However, to progress further in the Minutemen quest line, the quest must be completed. It is possible to complete this quest without ever getting the fusion core and power armor. It is possible to get the minigun from the vertibird without power armor, though this requires a strength of 8 or more. It takes approximately 200 rounds from the minigun to kill the Deathclaw. The Deathclaw can be killed by hiding in the corner building and shooting at it from the broken windows. If it leaves, approach it and quickly sprint back to the building. The Deathclaw is a scripted event. A player can stand on the museum roof and watch the devastation. However, the player needs to kill the Deathclaw to continue the quest. The Concord Deathclaw is a unique enemy. It has relatively low health for a Deathclaw, only 100, but has extremely high damage resistance, 560. As a result, armor-piercing weapons are particularly effective against it. The Deathclaw entrance to the street leads past a few small rooms into the main sewer line. After some time has passed since when freedom calls, raiders will begin responding around Concord. The Deathclaw, which attacks the sole survivor during this quest, however, will not respawn after. Of the missing person calls I've gone out on, only a handful have ever resulted in a complete disappearance, meaning no trace of the person and no body ever found. But sometimes, finding a body just leads to more questions than answers. Here are some of the bodies we found that have become infamous in our team. A teenage boy whose remains were recovered almost a year after he vanished. We found the top of his skull, 2 finger bones, and his camera, almost 40 miles from where he was last seen. The camera, sadly, was destroyed. The pelvis of an older man who had vanished a month earlier. That was all we found. The lower jaw and right foot of a 2-year-old boy on the highest peak of a ridge and the southern part of the park. The body of a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome, almost 20 miles from where she'd vanished. She had died of exposure 3 weeks after going missing, and all of her clothes were intact, except...
Hey, up here, on the balcony! I've got a group of settlers inside. The raiders are almost through the door. Grab that laser musket and help us, please!
No sign of him now.
or her shoes and jacket. There were berries and cooked meat in her stomach when they did the autopsy. The coroner said it appeared as if someone had been taking care of her. There were no suspects ever identified. The frozen body of a 1-year-old baby found a week after vanishing in the hollow trunk of a tree.